This is episode number 19 with James Maskell.
If everything happens unchecked and trends continue, America's going to be bankrupt by 2040. Every other country in the world is going to be bankrupt. It doesn't matter who's paying, everyone's going bankrupt because chronic diseases can't be treated long-term with medication. They can, but it just ends up being unbelievably expensive and doesn't really work.
Welcome back to another episode of Anchors of Health, where it's all about helping you achieve the best health you possibly can. And I do that by bringing on world-class experts under 4 key anchors of health, which is mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. I'm your host, Bill Choi, and today's episode is a very important one. It's all about the evolution of medicine, what it is, how it can reduce chronic diseases, and what will happen if we do not evolve our current medical system. Chronic diseases right now are the leading causes of death and disability worldwide. It's increasing globally across every region, and there's a large number of problems associated with it on many levels. Problems that people are not even aware is happening. So the question to you is the current medical system that we have right now the best we can do at solving chronic diseases? My special guest thinks we can do better, much better. In fact, over the last decade, he's been in the trenches of health creation in America, sparking debate, shifting paradigms, and working to accelerate improved healthcare outcomes. He's someone that's actually doing something about it, and it's very rare to find someone like him, and you'll see why in this episode. He's the founder of the Functional Forum, which is the largest integrative medicine conference. He's also the author of the best-selling book, The Evolution of Medicine. Join the movement to solve chronic disease and fall back in love with medicine. An eye-opening book written for doctors, but I think it's a book that everyone should read. He's also the founder of New Health, which he'll tell you about in this episode, so make sure you listen all the way to the end. And he just announced something yesterday that will make healthcare easier, more affordable, and better for you and your family. To check that out, just go to newhealthnow.com. That's KNEW healthnow.com. I'll also have it in the show notes along with everything we discussed at anchorsofhealth.com/19. So let's just jump right in. Here's my interview with James Maskell. James, welcome to the show.
Great to be here with you, Bill. Thanks for having me.
So James, I read your book, The Evolution of Medicine, and looked into a lot of the work that you're doing. And I gotta say, the work that you are doing is one of the most important of anyone in the health space. And that's not to say that others aren't important, because they are, and we need everyone. But the work that you are doing has the opportunity to solve major problems. So I want to get into all of that. But before we do, can you share with us your journey of how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, so I was the weird kid at school that did natural medicine. So I was born in America, but I grew up in England, and I had a homeopath and a chiropractor, and I didn't really realize that was weird until I went to school and no one knew what a chiropractor was. And then, so that was sort of like the very beginning. And, it was, my mother was the only mom at school who insisted that I be given, that she be called before I given antibiotics. And so here's my mom with no medical training, sort of predicting the downside of overuse of antibiotics by 30 years. And that always sort of stuck with me. How did she know, what was she aware of that other people weren't aware of? And, that I sort of had a rebellious phase where I thought I needed to be an investment banker, and I did that for about a year. And then out of university, I did health economics at university. And then, I had a sort of crisis of conscience moment where I realized I was playing for the wrong team, and I moved to America in 2005. And yes, since then, just been on the front lines of health creation. What does it take? I saw that the costs for medicine were going out of control. America had, terrible return on investment for the dollars that they were spending in health. And so I just, I dived in. I worked in a clinic for 2 years. Then I had a business, selling to doctors who were doing functional integrated medicine for about 5 years. I started a couple of other businesses, all based around helping doctors who were doing integrative and functional medicine build more successful practices, learn how to market themselves, learn how to communicate what they were doing. And then it all sort of started to ratchet up in 2014, where I realized, I had an opportunity to speak at quite a lot of conferences to doctors, basically about how to use the internet, how to market themselves, how to organize their practice. And I realized that the medical conference game, particularly the functional medicine conference game, was really stuck in the 80s. And so no one was videoing it. There was no free content online. So we started basically a live show. You know, it was a show for doctors, kind of a medical conference, but it was more fun. We had Daft Punk music. We had, videos. We had sort of young aspirational doctors on the stage, a lot of women doctors, not sort of ousting the old boy network. And ultimately, it took off. And by the fourth episode, we had, more doctors watching than any of the conferences. And it's just been a journey from there. So, it's been pretty congruent looking back to see the whole process. But at the time, we've just been sort of hustling forward, and the last 4 years has been a great ride because we've been able to sort of make some significant impact in this one little area of medicine. But what I feel is about to happen, and what many people who are smarter than me feel, is that in the next 10 years, this is going to be the kind of medicine that will become the default of care. And so we're just sort of ahead of the curve by being here early.
So it seems like a huge turning point in your journey was when you made that decision to quit your job as an investment banker, which I imagine would have been a far more lucrative path for you, but you walked away from it. Why? Where did that drive come from? What made you feel compelled to do that?
So, there's a lot of different ways that I can explain it, but ultimately, one of the most interesting things in my economics training was this concept of externalities, right? I don't know if it's kind of an economic concept, but a classic example of externalities is pollution, right? A negative externality. It's something that's produced in the context of something being created that ends up costing society more than the individual players, right? So if you have a bonfire at your house, it doesn't cost you anything. You don't pay for the pollution, but ultimately, if everyone has a bonfire, there's pollution and it causes asthma and it causes lots of things. Living in LA, I can understand that. If you live in Shanghai, you understand it even better. And the first coal-powered plant in Shanghai doesn't cause any sort of problems, but by the 100th one, you can't see your hand in front of your face. So, that's kind of the idea of a negative externality. But there's also this idea of a positive externality where, someone could do something on behalf of someone else and it adds value to society and it doesn't cost anyone anything. And I just had a moment of clarity where I was just like, in an interconnected world, if the world is actually profoundly interconnected and not profoundly separate, and that was sort of like, I think, the thinking that my mother had brought to the table with regard to antibiotics. That was sort of like a moment of clarity that I had, is that you need to focus on doing things that are, that are driven by positive externalities, education, empowerment, those kind of concepts, because ultimately if you empower one person and they support and they have a sort of a positive impact on other people as a result, that's the perfect example of a positive externality. So it was sort of a crisis of conscience. It sort of happened under, interesting circumstances, but ultimately I just decided that I had to be involved with something that was, had positive externalities. And at that exact moment, I was working at the biggest trading floor of the biggest bank in the world. This was in the mortgage-backed security industry. At a time where everyone was getting into that, 2003, 2004. And ultimately, that market was really hot. And I was like, maybe this is a good idea, packaging people's mortgages and selling it, but maybe it's not. And maybe there's massive negative externalities that are going to come down the pipe. And that's kind of exactly what happened 2 years later.
Well, I applaud you on that decision because most people wouldn't pass up on the money that comes with that job. But you did, and you didn't ignore a problem that you clearly saw. So let's unpack these problems or major issues that you're seeing because it's multi-layered. And you mentioned some of them already. It's from the standpoint of the economy, from the standpoint of the medical professional themselves, and from the standpoint of our health, everyone, the health of the human race. So can you unpack what the major problems are and why people should care?
Yeah, so, I called my book and my organization The Evolution of Medicine because, when I think of evolution, I think about something adapting to its environment, right? And that's really what medicine has to do. The environment in which medicine was created, the current era of medicine, the pharmacological based, sort of high intense drugs and surgery based model was created in an era where that was a super relevant and strategic concept, right? In an era of very significant, let's say acute disease, right? So a lot of trauma, surgery, a lot of, trauma and infection. It made sense to build the system that we have now. But, here we are 50 to 100 years later, and the types of diseases that we're dealing with today are very, very different in nature, right? So, my dad lives in South Africa. Even in South Africa, 10 years ago, the number one killer is tuberculosis, TB. And, today, the number one killer is type 2 diabetes. So in South Africa, it's even more of a profound shift. It happened more slowly in America. But ultimately, what you see from that is just that, we have these diseases are very different in nature. These modern diseases, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune, all the autoimmune diseases are growing exponentially because they're a product of the environment. They're chronic diseases. They're not acute diseases. And these diseases need to be treated in a different way. And so ultimately, what we saw is that medicine has to evolve and adapt to be able to deal with these issues. So, in the old era, it didn't really make sense for the patient to be involved in the care, right? Because if they're just getting the antibiotics, the doctor is the one with all the tricks, right? The doctor is the one that can save your life. And so the doctor gives you the antibiotics when you have an infection and you get better. And the patient really can't do anything to support that. And so that locks in this concept of the doctor being God, the patient being sort of at the mercy of the medicine. But if you move forward now to type 2 diabetes, the doctor has no tricks, right? The metformin that the doctor prescribes is literally there to help the patient stay alive and modulate the blood sugar because the body has become unable to do it itself. And so in that situation, what you find is that we have a different scenario where in the new scenario, now the only one who can reverse the type 2 diabetes back to full root cause resolution, back to full health, is not the doctor, but the patient. And so you've got a 180-degree shift on who the most important person in the medical relationship is, but we're still doing medicine the old way, right? And so, we saw that we need a new operating system for medicine. So that's functional medicine, which is perfectly designed for this new type of disease. And we need new types of technology. So we need technology to be able to track behavior, to empower the patient, to help them understand the progress or the reversal of their disease and how it's happening in real time. And then we need different types of providers. We need health coaches. We need people that can actually facilitate the patient to participate in their care when it hasn't been, a typical thing. And so that's really the evolution of medicine, right? It's about helping doctors to shift their practices towards, more kind of structures that can reverse chronic disease. So that's, that was the starting point, for that concept, and we've been doing it for 4 years. And ultimately, in the book, I sort of brought together two ideas, which is one is this need to have new systems for chronic disease, but the other thing is that doctors today, and the book was really written for doctors. Doctors today are having the worst time ever because they're killing themselves in record numbers. Doctor suicide, 1 million people in America lose their doctor to suicide every year. 1 million people a year. So the number of doctors multiplied by their patient bases equals 1 million people. And that's a record. You have record rates of doctor dissatisfaction, where for the first time, where you have, families of physicians that have been physicians together, in families for decades, generations are now telling their kids, don't be a doctor. That's never happened. And so, we're at a point now where I sort of try to connect those two things, because I'll tell you right now that people who do functional medicine, doctors that have switched their practice to functional medicine, love their jobs. They get to spend time with patients. They get to the root cause of different dysfunction. They get to partner with their patients. They get to see full resolution of issues and symptoms. And that is incredibly rewarding. And it's kind of what doctors thought they were going to be doing when they went to medical school. And so, what I tried to do in my book was to make a case for doctors, get ahead of the curve, practice the medicine of 2020 today, and start a practice doing functional medicine. And we sort of gave them a blueprint on how to do that with the lowest possible overhead, essentially building a practice off a laptop. You don't need as much stuff as you did in the old medicine. You just need to be able to have a real relationship with patients, to set up a structure that you can spend time with them. And there's lots of models emerging as successful for delivering that new type of patient relationship in an affordable way so that everyone can afford it and not just the richest 5% of America.
I mean, it's amazing how you are merging the worlds of wellness and medicine, essentially bridging that gap. You're opening up a whole new world of possibilities. Now, you mentioned functional medicine, and I think this term needs a bit more clarification because people have heard all these other terms like integrative medicine and holistic medicine. So can you clarify what functional medicine is?
Yeah, functional medicine is a very specific type of operating system for delivering medicine that is integrative and is holistic, right? Integrative, I think, is sort of like a big umbrella term where you can integrate any two things. Typically, you can integrate standard of care stuff and non-standard of care stuff, and that's integrated medicine. So, a psychiatrist who's using, psychiatric medication, but also neurofeedback, that's integrated medicine. Now, not everyone would, when someone else says that they do integrated medicine, they're not doing that. But that's just my idea, and this is not, the law, but I just feel like integrated medicine is the integration of standard of care, non-standard of care modalities. And standard of care would be drugs and surgery, and non-standard of care would be like nutrition, lifestyle, all the sort of wellness stuff. Holistic, is a term that just refers to taking a whole body approach, which, functional medicine is holistic too. But the thing that's different about functional medicine is that everyone's doing it the same way. And functional medicine is a specific operating system that doctors use. It's like the intake, how you intake your patients, how you score them, how you sort of see where their priorities are, how you determine which kind of inputs are going to be best for them, and it's a specific system, and that has a lot of advantages, especially when you're trying to scale up. And in about a month's time, we expect to get the full-term results of a 2-year study that's been done at the Cleveland Clinic on functional medicine. And the Cleveland Clinic is one of the most credible and sort of progressive medical organizations in the world. And they've done a 2-year study, outcome study on functional medicine from their center that's been in Cleveland. And it's going to show dramatically lower costs, dramatically better outcomes. And that's going to be sort of a big moment where everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, you were right, functional medicine is better. But up until now, there hasn't been that sort of mainstream credibility, but it's going to come in the next 2 months.
Can you talk about the background of a lot of the functional medicine practitioners? Because a lot of them are also conventional doctors that are merging both worlds together, right? Is that the case?
Yeah, exactly. So most doctors at this point doing functional medicine, like if you went back 10 years ago, the early adopters were, there was some chiropractors and, there were some nutritionists and people who sort of got the need for this early. Like, most people come to functional medicine in the early years. Most people came to functional medicine, doctors, because they had a patient or they had a daughter, or they had a wife, or they had someone where they couldn't get them better with drugs, and they were like, I got to go outside the box. It wasn't, if it was just a patient, they'd probably be like, I don't know, go see some other doctor. I'll send you to a specialist. But if it's your daughter or your wife or someone that you're close to, you're like, why can't I get this person better? Like, why has she still got allergies? Why is this constipation not going away? And then looking for other ways of doing it. And then even more serious diseases than that. And so, typically then you see that it works, and then you're like, oh, I feel a moral obligation now to go and practice this medicine. But in the last 10 years, just because of the sort of increase in popularity, you've got a lot of celebrity doctors like Dr. Mark Hyman. And, if you look at the New York Times bestseller list, there's always some functional medicine stuff in there. Something like a book like Whole 30, for instance, which is a paleo book. Dallas Hartwig is a big functional medicine guy. So it's just been in the news and in the sort of, coming into the mass subconscious, I would say, in the last 10 years. And so you've seen, the vast majority of doctors who have come across now, who, we focused our show on and who we've helped to come across and who my book was read by, was by physicians, internal medicine, primary care, family medicine, and then some of the specialties where they really realized they need a new approach to psychiatry, cardiology. I don't know if you saw this the other day, but there was this very damning article that showed that heart patients got better results when the top heart surgeons, the top cardiovascular surgeons were at conferences. So that was, a damning moment where it's like, the more trained you are in the super specialty, the outcomes aren't always the best. And that's because, there's a lot of problems in the medical system with incentives and otherwise. So, we've helped to facilitate a lot of doctors to come into functional medicine, and ultimately, This has just been really phase one of our plan to build an army of physicians and other practitioners that could deliver functional medicine at scale. Because ultimately, why I came to America and what I've been working on for 13 years is what is a structure that could actually reduce healthcare costs to a reasonable amount. Because at this moment, if everything happens unchecked and trends continue, America's going to be bankrupt by 2040. Every other country in the world is going to be bankrupt. It doesn't matter who's paying. In the UK, the government pays for everything. They're going bankrupt. In America, businesses pay, Medicare pays, individual people pay, and everyone's going bankrupt because chronic diseases can't be treated long-term with medication. They can, but it just ends up being unbelievably expensive and doesn't really work. And you see life expectancy going down for the first time. So phase one of the plan is like build an army of providers that can deliver functional medicine at scale. And, we can get into part two of the plan when you're ready.
Yeah, let's go there. Let's jump right in.
Yeah, so, we've been doing this for 4 years, right? 4 or 5 years. We've been building this army of doctors and practitioners. And so, what I realized a couple of years ago was that facilitating doctors to become entrepreneurs and start their own practice doing functional medicine was necessary, but definitely not sufficient, right, to deliver this kind of transformation. I mean, our mission at the Evolution of Medicine is to evolve mankind beyond chronic disease. And ultimately, it's just moving a little bit too slow for what I'd like to see. And really what I see is that having a lot of small independent practices is going to get us maybe from the 1% of people that are using it now, maybe to the 3% or the 5%, and a 5x growth is good. But ultimately, everyone needs this and needs this now. And there's an urgency to get this to everyone that is really important. So at the beginning of 2016, I started thinking about scaling this up. And I started to think, how do people actually get their healthcare? And about half of Americans get their healthcare through their employer, right?
Right.
And most people who are listening to this probably through their employer. And then half the people get it through insurance. So that's where the game is being played, right? That's where we have to get in and deliver. And, when Trump was elected, it sort of, it showed even more clearly that these two segments were important because, as you can see from what Trump's done over the first year and a half, you're not going to see any movement towards single payer anytime soon. In fact, we're moving further and further away from it. And so you see where the innovation in medicine is coming from. It's coming from Apple and Amazon and JP Morgan Chase and Berkshire Hathaway, not from the government, because the government, in a Republican presidency, it's not going to be, it's not going to be moving in the direction towards single payer. And so, we started to think about how could we set up organizations, companies, and insurance to be able to deliver functional medicine. So the first thing we thought of is how can we deliver this in a super efficient way? Because even though everyone's made their best efforts, us, the education organizations, the supplement companies, the lab companies, all the people who benefit from functional medicine growing, everyone's trying to get more doctors to do it. But for many reasons, we don't have an army of 1 million functional medicine doctors today, not even close. It's grown a bit, but, there's still a lot of barriers to doctors to switch. One of the biggest ones being everyone has to be an entrepreneur, basically, to build their own functional practice. So we started at the beginning of last year, 2017, to really think about what would it take to deliver functional medicine at scale. If we wanted to deliver functional medicine to an employer, let's say United Airlines, 86,000 employees, if they wanted functional medicine, how would we do it? And basically what we realized, and what I'd seen from my years of doing this is that, functional medicine is really two things that's happening simultaneously, which most doctors are doing both of. There's the helping people implement the healthy lifestyle behaviors, right? So the food, the sleep, the exercise, the rest and relaxation, the meditation, that part of things is one part of it, helping people actually to live a healthy lifestyle. And then the other part of it is sort of going deep into the causes, looking to see what are some causes that might not have been seen. If you've got a chronic illness and it's unexplained, what is the cause and how can we deal with that cause? And these two things are happening simultaneously. But ultimately, a doctor is way overqualified to be doing the lifestyle component. So we've been encouraging doctors to hire health coaches for 4 years. So what we did is we set up a model where we were could we deliver the benefit of functional medicine to the masses with mainly health coaches and doctors sort of supervising in behind and using them as needed for the resolution, but mainly having these health coaches helping people deliver on the lifestyle. Because if people really get the lifestyle right, typically, and for all the people who are listening to this, if you've got a chronic issue, and it's not like you're not on a million medications, the chances are it would go away if you dealt with either stress, sleep, food, or exercise in a clear way. Most people, do some of those well if they're into wellness, but do one of them really poorly. And stress is typically one that can be the hardest. I know it's the hardest for me, finding time to be able to, that. I sleep well, I eat generally well, but stress is something that affects all of us. And I think some people say it's like $300 billion of medical care is due to stress-related illnesses, right? So what we thought is, let's just see if we can get that delivered via telemedicine, delivered via text. What we found is that patients love to be able to text their health professional. So we set up a new business called New Health, and we were like, our first thing was, could we get people better with mainly health coaches, with doctors supervising and doing a little bit of root cause analysis when needed, but ultimately the army being health coaches, not doctors. And the results were amazing. People were getting well, people were reducing their inflammation, people were getting off medication, people were reducing their hemoglobin A1C, which is like the marker of diabetes. We were testing these people. And the other thing that we were thinking of is, what is the lowest possible price that we could get for all of these services? Like labs, supplements, drugs, like what are the services out there where we can get the lowest prices? Because really the reason why healthcare is so expensive in America is that everything costs double to triple of Canada or England or everywhere else. It's a massive scam, right? And so these were the two biggest issues. Could we get people well and off the need for medication? And could we get the lowest prices for everything in the ecosystem? And so we launched New Health last year, and we were very successful at doing that. And so at the end of last year, we started to think about, okay, now could we deliver this kind of thing in a health plan and look back at the two ways that people get health insurance. So the good news is we've got it going. So, we have partnered with a company called Benecomp. They have a product called Incenticare. And if you work at a company and you're listening to this and you're like, I love functional medicine for myself, and I'm sure all my coworkers would like it too, Google Incenticare. Incenticare is a employer product. It's from Benecomp. Benecomp is a 55-year-old insurance company that's been servicing employers for 55 years. And Incenticare is essentially a health plan that companies can buy today and incentivizes everyone in the company to get healthy, get off medication, and reduce their healthcare costs.
Can you go directly though, James?
It's for employers.
Oh, okay.
Right. So this, send this podcast to your head of HR, your CEO, or otherwise, because ultimately people can buy that today. It's called Incenticare. It's for employers. And, it's super exciting in the employer market. Like half of Americans get their healthcare through employers. So if you're listening to this, you like the idea of functional medicine, you like the idea of having a low deductible health plan, Incenticare incentivizes people to participate in the wellness program through giving them lower deductibles. So it's a great program. And, for the next 3 years, we're going to be delivering that to as many employers as possible. And you can just Google Incenticare, you'll find Benecomp, and that's what we're doing on that end. But more exciting than that, and you said, is there something that anyone can buy? I have a big announcement, and just yesterday we announced this on our 51st episode of our Functional Forum, the show that I created that's gone every first Monday of the month for the last 4 years. The 51st episode was last night. You can go to youtube.com/functionalforum to watch it. But ultimately, what we launched last night is a way that every single person in this country can get the value of functional medicine and can rapidly reduce their health costs, through that structure. And we launched essentially what is the new iteration of New Health. So New Health with a K, if you go to newhealth.com, we launched a health cost sharing cooperative. So if you're listening to this and you hate your health insurance, you're not alone. Most people do. It's way overpriced. You don't get the services you need. If you're the kind of person that cares about nutrition and fitness and healthy lifestyle, and you've got normal insurance, you are typically way over insured because you're paying way too much for way too little. Basically, because you're paying for all the old people. And that's just the way that it works out right now. There is a new opportunity at this moment in history to be able to do something different. In my whole professional career, Bill, since 2010, everyone in this country has been forced to have health insurance under tax penalty. If you didn't have health insurance, you have to pay the tax penalty. That's been in place since basically 2012, but pretty much since ACA started in 2010. At this moment in history, since January 2nd, since the Trump tax bill, there is now no penalty on not having health insurance. And so what that allows is innovation in this space. And we have created the first non-denominational, non-Christian, available to everyone, health cost sharing cooperative, where groups of people will be able to come together under unified principles of how they think about the world. They'll be able to set up their own algorithms basically for how health costs are shared, and enter into an agreement with groups of over 10,000 of their friends. And this blockchain technology that we have will automatically execute those trends. So what you'll see is that essentially this will bring down the cost dramatically. Every dollar that you pay to Aetna, you're paying 45 cents of that money is going towards paying people's healthcare. The other 55 cents is going to Mark Bertolini's salary, is going to paying the shareholders, is going to pay for the massive infrastructure of all their offices. Our system has no infrastructure. There's a zero overhead game. 95% of money goes towards paying claims. And we're going to start a series of health cost sharing cooperatives. It's going to start as one big one. And then over time, once we have, you need 10,000 people, because essentially at 10,000 people, the community can bear the risk of a pool rather than an insurance company. So the community now bears the risk. So if we're in a group of 10,000 and Bill, you have a car accident and it costs you $10,000, everyone chips in $1 automatically. That's the basic premise. And in our system, it's going to be a completely open source system. Everyone is going to be able to see what everyone else is charging. It's de-identified, but ultimately the beauty of blockchain is a completely open, decentralized system. And people will be able to, once we get to say 100,000, then different splinter groups will be able to split off, where now you could have like a CrossFit group where all the people in CrossFit could be in one, and they could say, okay, we want to pay for our CrossFit because we love CrossFit. And so our group will just pay for everyone's CrossFit. And it's going to be higher than the normal group because, that's probably $150 to $200 a month that everyone's agreeing to paying in that group, but everyone's fine with it because they value CrossFit and they're happy to pay, instead of $100 a month, they're happy to pay $250 a month if it includes their CrossFit too. So that's the basic premise. And as of yesterday, we launched the concept. We are basically doing a 5-month Kickstarter that started yesterday, where you can apply $100 down to essentially save your place in the queue. For that $100, you're going to get a book that I wrote on how to navigate the healthcare system and how to get the lowest possible cost in the system. Never pay cash, never pay, use your insurance card for things like labs. If you go directly to the labs, you can pay, 5 cents on the dollar for everything that you need. Just basically how to get value through the healthcare system. You're going to get a course that we made. You're going to get a ticket to we're doing a 40-city live tour to launch this later this year. So between June 26th and November 1st, we're traveling to 40 cities around this country to launch this concept. So you can get a ticket to come to one of those events when we hit your city. And you're going to get a bunch of other content that we've created. We've got a whole summit on interpreting your genetic information. That's what you're going to get for your $100 down. And then when we launch, our goal is to launch in time for open enrollment December 1st. And you can come in, and we expect it to be somewhere between a quarter to a fifth of the price of commercial insurance. And we also expect that you will get functional medicine as part of the care. You will have a health coach on the phone that you can text. They will help you to stay healthy. You'll have this network of functional medicine doctors at your disposal if it's something that you need. And ultimately, we want to build something that is sustainable. And the biggest thing that separates insurance from the health cost sharing cooperative is this. It incentivizes you to help your fellow man. And that force has been missing from medicine for the last 100 years. And that force is the default of how humans have interacted for millions of years. And we are returning to real principles of tribe, principles of community, principles of empowerment, and principles of ultimately transparency, right? Things that have been part of our human evolution. So it's called New Health with a K. And, if you're listening to the Anchors of Health podcast, you're one of the first people in the world to know about this. And, we'd love your support. $100 down helps to support us in our journey. It helps, it helps everyone move forward. And this is something that, as a result of the Trump tax bill, is now an opportunity that we have in the next 3 years. And if we can get 1 million, 5 million, 10 million people into our health cost sharing cooperative, not only is the cost of any one particular big incident spread out over way more people, not only will we set up a structure where people help each other, but we will have a seat at the table for any future negotiation. And when President Winfrey strides into the Oval Office in January 2021, we'll have a moment where, she will have to listen to the way that we think about health. And we will prove in the next 3 years that we can deliver better outcomes at lower cost. And my hope is that we will look back at insurance in the same way that we look back at other industries that have gone by the wayside as just sort of an archaic way to deal with a problem that's much more elegantly dealt with a community structure.
James, I love it. And I know you're short on time, so I think that's a great way to close it up. I can't wait to see what the future of health looks like under your leadership. It was a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Bill.
There it is. I hope you got a lot out of that interview with James Maskell. I can't say enough about the tremendous work that he's doing for a better healthcare system. If you're interested in what he was talking about with New Health, which just launched yesterday, just go to newhealthnow.com. That's KNEW healthnow.com. I'll also have it in the show notes along with everything we discussed at anchorsofhealth.com/19. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Peace.